welcome back to Let's Talk Racism. We are your hosts, Rachel,
Renee.
And Sophia.
Racism has been a big issue all around the world. Furthermore, while anxiety and fear about the ongoing pandemic have been widespread, Asian-focused racist incidents and Black Lives Matter protests have constantly been happening throughout the year. Unfortunately, recently there has been a lot of Asian hate crimes happening across the world. It's important to learn more about racism and what you can do to become anti-racist.
What is it like being a person of color in BC? Why is it important to talk about racism? Why is diversity in legal enforcement important? All these questions will be answered by today's special guest.
Our guest today is the Honorable David St. Pierre, who is a provincial court judge. The Honorable David St. Pierre has been a sitting judge at the Provincial Court of British Columbia since 2009. He completed his undergraduate degree in psychology at the University of Alberta, and after a few years working in the music business, he attended the University of Calgary for law school. He and his wife enjoy 3 amazing kids and 2 grandchildren. Hello, how has your day been so far? We're honored to be speaking with you today.
It's been a beautiful day today. The sunshine has finally come back. I'm getting a little vitamin D therapy, so that's good.
Yay.
So before we start the questions, is there like a disclaimer you need to say before?
Yes, just to tell folks that because I'm a judge and I have my own opinions, of course, but none of the opinions that I have or anything that I say necessarily is the opinions of the Provincial Court of BC. So they're my opinions only, and I don't speak for the court. So that's just the only one. Yeah.
Great. So we're just gonna go straight into it.
Sure.
So first, could you tell us a bit about yourself and your current position and familial background?
Sure. I was adopted from birth. My mom came over from the UK. She was a musician, and she was traveling Canada, and she just fell in love with the country, and so she stayed here. She was with a band, and she was traveling along. Got to British Columbia and decided to stay. Started in Montreal, and she adopted my brother and I at first, the 2 kids. He's red-haired, freckled, white kid, and I'm not. And in those days, you could just walk into a room and you could basically pick out some kids that you wanted to adopt. So that's basically what she started to do. And she ended up adopting 5 kids. So I have a black brother, I have Indigenous sister, I have white brother. It's a really quite a mixed family. And we had lots of foster kids over the years too. So probably maybe 20 foster kids over the years. So it was a really busy household. Moved around a lot, got to know, had to learn how to get along with folks, how to meet new people, how to make friends. Ended up in Edmonton, finished high school in Edmonton, and then I went to University of Alberta for my undergraduate degree in psychology, which I really liked, and I did philosophy too. Really, really interesting, and I think the years that are in your first, it's amazing years. You start out like 17-year-olds. You're probably coming out at 21 years old. Then you're a totally different person. So I thought those were just amazing years. And during those years, I was always interested in issues of race and justice. So I joined the campus groups that were fighting for such things. And rallied in the streets and stuff, and it was amazing connecting with people of like mind and people that had those kind of dreams of a society that could all live together and respect each other, acknowledge that we all are basically have the same desires and the same goals and the same dreams. And so I went from there, and I was doing music for a while. I'd always done music, and after my undergraduate degree, I went to become a professional musician and worked in a music store and did the touring and that kind of thing. It was fun, but it's tough. It's a tough life. And eventually I saw some of my classmates that I'd gone to my undergraduate degree with, and we're going on to do various things like grad school and medicine and law. And so I decided to go to law school at University of Calgary, which I really liked. It's a small school. There's like 30 kids in each class, so that, well, 60 kids in each year, but 2 classes of 30. So it's a very intimate group, and that was perfect for me. I liked that kind of grouping. And I got on to a group that was working on the human rights legislation in Alberta as a student. I was the student liaison for the new human rights code that they were trying to draft at that time. That was back in the 90s. I was a founding member of the Black Law Students Association of Canada, which was a national group, and we had conferences every year, and I got to meet all the Black law students around the country. So it was really a really good start for me to get to understand the different struggles that are around the country, because it is a different experience when you're growing up as a racialized minority, say in Western Canada, than if you were in, say, in Toronto, especially as a Black person, because the number of Black people in British Columbia is very small. And you go to Toronto, of course, and there's a very large West Indian population. There's a large African population. So it's interesting here. And then in Nova Scotia, you've got a very large a group of Blacks that have been there for hundreds of years. They were the Black loyalists, and the descendants of those Black loyalists have been there for hundreds of years. So it's very interesting to look across the country and see the different kinds of experiences that people had.
Yeah. So, like, what is it like to be a person of color, not only in British Columbia, but also in Canada in your career and personal life? And how does it intersect?
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating in a way when you get so much media and information from our neighbors to the south that we tend to meld our experience, or everyone, at least people in the community, start to think that our experience is either the same or is very different. But at the end of the day, I don't think Canada is, we kind of think of ourselves as something, as a shining light or some kind of beacon of racial harmony, which at times it is, and then at times it's just not. It's just not this, and people have to understand that the same struggles that they have everywhere in the world about such things, we have them here. I mean, our experience and the way we've treated Indigenous communities since the time of the colonization is not a great history. It's not something to be proud of. It's not something we can say, Canada, oh, we're so different than everybody else, because we're not. And it was the same with Black people too. So, growing up, there's all these stereotypes that people see from, US television that they want to, that they put on you. I mean, they automatically think that you can play basketball. They automatically think that you're going to be good at this, or you're going to be good at that. You're not going to be good at other things, like academics, for instance, which is unbelievable. But those were the kind of stereotypes that I had faced when I was a young student. That was back in, I graduated from high school back in 1982. So it was a different time.
Yeah. Well, just speaking about the stereotypes you just had, why do you think people have negative racial stereotypes towards people of color?
Yeah, good question. And I think it all comes down to use the word. When I say ignorance, I don't mean people that aren't smart. I mean, they just don't know. They have no experience. They set up this group as an other, and they just don't have any contact with those folks. So they basically import the only knowledge they have about what they see, and that's to import stereotypes and information that they've gleaned from other sources. And those other sources are things, movies, magazines, things like that. They see sports figures on TV, and that's what they think. When they see somebody Black, they go, well, that's all I know. And so they put their stereotypes on those folks, instead of just saying to themselves, I'd like to learn about that person's backgrounds and experiences, because we're not all the same.
Mhm.
And it's not one of those things, people say, well, I treat everyone the same because I don't see color. Well, I I think the aware person, the person who understands history, they won't say things like that, because of course you should see color,
Mhm.
and that should um, that should inform you connect with folks. You should ask yourself, how do I educate myself as experience have had simply by virtue of culture, of their race, or by virtue of their religion. You should be curious, and you should want to find out these
Mhm.
things. Everybody should. I mean, we should all be learning about each other. I mean, that's what makes living in a diverse community so interesting. Is that we do have lots of different experiences, and we should learn about
Mhm.
those experiences.
Yeah. And speaking like the stereotypes, our organization just made a post about how media portrays like
Hmm.
people of color, and how like a lot of TV shows they use black people as like
Yeah,
criminals, which really like makes like less like younger kids think black people are
yeah,
criminals when they aren't. And I don't think those negative stereotypes should be used in the media.
yeah. No, I agree 100%. And and there's a fine line to creating kind of negative images. So for instance, we should learn about slavery. We should do that. But imagine how traumatizing that is for the person who is black and is sitting in a classroom and having to look at some of those images and hear about that history. It's very traumatizing. So it's a very delicate balance of how we should engage in this kind of learning,
Mhm.
and it should be with a real understanding of the impact that it's had on those people. Um, because it's not a benign, it's an impact that carries on over the years, even if slavery was abolished 100,
Yeah.
200 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And on that piece of like kind of like talking about it and like education and spreading awareness, like why do you think people find it so difficult to talk about racism?
Yeah. I think there's an embarrassment and an awkwardness about it because there's a lot of shame built into it. It's such a shameful thing to treat other people differently, and not just differently, but horribly, as a const just because of the different race of that person. And there's some shame involved in that. If you're looking back to it and you're saying, well, those were my ancestors, well, I'd be I'd be embarrassed about that. So, but what I think people hear when if a black person is to talk to somebody white and to tell them how systemic racism or that history of racism still affects them today, it's very awkward and painful for everybody to talk about, and for the other side to listen to and to experience and to acknowledge, yes, those were my ancestors, those were people with my skin color that did that to another set of peoples. But they shouldn't feel like that. I mean, it's a learn. Nobody is saying, when we're starting to talk about race, nobody is saying, well, your people did this to us. They're just basically saying, this is how I feel, and I want you to understand how I feel, so that you and we can work together to change the system. And so when I talk about systemic changes in the institutions, you will understand why I'm saying those changes are necessary, and you'll help. You'll be somebody who's helping and institute those changes, instead of somebody who's fighting against it, because you really don't understand why they need to be changed.
Right.
So,
hmm Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And so when we're talking about like racism and how this will kind of like influence systemic change, like how do you feel the role of like talking about racism kind of like influences that and like why is it important?
yeah, I mean, I think if we had a chance to sit down when we're having, you're talking to your friends, and this happens to me all the time. You're sitting in a group where you have some black people and you have some white people, and the Black people want to, tell a story about something that's happened, and everybody kind of acknowledge, you know, acknowledges that, and wants to tell their story as well. And it becomes, and sometimes the white folks there again get get it's painful, and they don't want to go into that kind of a thing. They'll say something like, well, maybe you just didn't perceive the situation correctly, or maybe you were a little bit overly sensitive as to what happened in that situation. And what it means is, what they're saying is that, I don't want to acknowledge that this thing exists, so just please don't talk about it. When we really should just be quiet and listen. When I go into a group of somebody else that I don't know about their culture or their lived experiences, I sit and listen. I mean, your obligation is to learn, to want to learn, to take that knowledge and to use it to change your own implicit biases, or to just be acknowledge those biases or explicit biases, to acknowledge those, and then to use those to make some kind of changes. But your first thing that you have to do is to listen, learn, and it takes a certain type of humility, and it takes a certain type of you know uh, acknowledgement of other, which is a hard thing for some people to engage in. I think it's just one of those things that we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable at first when you're learning,
Right.
because a lot of these experiences are painful ones. And if you get comfortable at being uncomfortable, the people that you're with are going to be very grateful, and I think they're going to appreciate that you're trying to learn.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
I think what you said is really important, like how people should acknowledge their biases and first, like they should listen instead of like refusing to learn
Mhm.
the new aspect because some people simply don't know about these stuff. So
Yeah.
then it's important for them to like learn it and actually like make use of that and change their like stereotypes and all that.
Mhm.
But if they don't learn and if they refuse to learn, then
Yeah.
I think that's their like do
Yeah.
actually want to learn in the first place.
That's right. And it's tough when you're telling somebody something, and they do one of those deflecting things. It's really hard. I mean, it's hard to have those people around, because basically they're denying your experience. And by doing that, when you deny someone's experience, you're basically saying you're not being a truthful reporter of your experience, which
Right.
is crazy. How can you call yourself somebody's friend if you're basically saying to them, you're not being a truthful reporter of your experience, or you're being a biased reporter of your
Mhm.
experience, and all you're doing is filtering it through your own life and your own upbringing and your own experiences.
Mhm.
That's the truth. That is your truth. And
Mhm.
whether it's their truth or whether they want to acknowledge it or
Mhm.
not, that's on them. I mean, but if they are a friend, they should be saying, I understand. That
Yeah.
I believe your experience. That's all there's to it.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
So, what have been your experiences with systemic racism in being a lawyer and now a judge? And like also, how did you overcome them?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that things that young lawyers go through are some of the problems and struggles and barriers that they have are compounded when you are a visible minority. I remember a couple of times as a young lawyer when people would come into my office and visibly be startled that I was sitting in a chair behind in the lawyer's desk, because they um, they expected something else. And this comes back to people's expectations. I mean, they expect a lawyer to look a certain way, to be an old dude with white hair or something like that.
Right.
And so they would ask, like, well, where's the lawyer? And I said, well, I am a lawyer. Oh, okay. But, but eventually in that business, if you're good, if you are competent, if you get the results that people are hoping for and expecting, it seems to me after a while in that business that they really didn't care. what racial makeup you were. They just wanted, they just wanted someone to do the job. But it does impact you. I walking into the courthouse when I was a young lawyer, I would get stopped because I would be dressed in a suit with my bag and stuff, and I would get stopped way more than the white kids were getting stopped. In courtroom, I would try to get up where the lawyers sit in front of the what's called the bar in the courtroom where the lawyers get to go in front of. And I had several occasions where I was asked to go sit down in the gallery and wait for my case to be called, and I said, "Well, I'm a lawyer." And they go, "Oh, well, you're a lawyer." It's just these sort of expectations that people have because they don't see it. They don't see it represented in movies. They don't see it represented in media, and that's changing. But that's why I think though that the visibility and the diversity in legal institutions, for instance, the one that I'm in, is so incredibly important. And it's important because for a justice system to have legitimacy, the people that are subject to that justice system has to believe that it actually provides justice for them. And it's the same with Indigenous peoples, with Black peoples, with Asian peoples, with all visible minorities, um, and for LGBTQ, for all people who are marginalized. If you don't believe that the justice system actually will provide outcomes of justice that are fair for you, how are you ever going to feel like you are fully integrated into a functioning, society, like a full society? Well, you can't. You can't. And so one of my jobs is, I think, as a judge, when people appear in front of me, is regardless of the outcome, like regardless of whether I'm dealing with a young person, Indigenous or otherwise, who has committed some kind of criminal activity, and therefore there's a consequence attached to it. If I impose that justice in a way that still maintains their dignity, I treat everybody with, I hope, I try, with civility and with respect, and I talk to people, everybody the same way, lawyers and accused people and everybody. If I do that, I want that person to leave the experience and say, you know what, um, I think I was treated fairly. I think that judge listened to me. I think that he treated me like a human being, didn't disrespect me, and I'm appreciative that of whether the outcome was bad or not, they'll still appreciate the experience wasn't dehumanizing or it wasn't degrading,
Right.
humiliating. That's a big part of it. Um, and I think it's important for those folks who come into the courtroom and they see you up on the bench and they go, "Oh, wow, okay, well there's a black judge. It's not all one kind of folks up there." So I hope that by doing that, you provide some legitimacy to a justice system that some folks just don't feel, and rightly so. They don't feel is legitimate or provides outcomes that are relevant to them.
Right. So on that note, why do you think diversity in like legal enforcement is really important?
Yeah, and I and again, like and every aspect of it, from the investigative agencies like the police, through
Yeah.
to the lawyers that are going to be dealing with you, the crown prosecutors and the defense lawyers, through to the judges that are going to be dealing with you, perhaps
Right.
corrections is going to be dealing with you. If you
Mhm.
don't see the vast array of your community represented in those different areas, then you're immediately going to think, well, why is that? Like, why is this system run by folks that have no knowledge of my experience? And one of the things that it's benefits is, say if you were a black judge, I mean a black police officer, and you're working with a whole bunch of Caucasian police officers who've never had some of the experiences that you've had as a racialized minority. Well, that officer, and here's where I think some racial justice people go wrong? Well, they say, well, that person's part of a system that oppresses other racialized minorities. I think here's where I think that is sort of some wrong-headed thinking, is that you need folks in there who are going to help to change that system in a whole bunch of different ways. One of the smallest ways they do it is they tell these other officers about their experiences. And so those other officers never understood that you used to get stopped like all the time for like no reason. Even you, we thought you were like one. This is how they think of some racialized minorities, is that there's the bad ones and then there's the good ones. And they go, well, we thought you were one of the good ones. Well, I am one of the good ones. But that happens. That happens to every racialized minority. When I was young, I get pulled over all the time. I thought I was one of the never got into trouble kids. I never got myself into trouble, but that's what happens, and it's simply because of the color of your skin. And if you can if you can start educating people from within, if you can get into positions of power and start making changes, that benefits everybody.
Right. Thank you. What advice do you have to people who are facing racism in like a professional or personal sphere?
Yeah, and that's a great question. You know how I've always gone through life, and my mom taught me this. I've got a little bit of feedback. These I give the people the benefit of the doubt. So if I've experienced something that might be a negative experience towards me, I don't automatically attribute that to some kind of racism on the part of the other person. I don't. My mom, she said, give people the benefit of the doubt unless they remove the doubt. And okay, and that's a fair way to go through life. Otherwise it'll drive you crazy when you're always thinking about, why didn't I get that job, I wonder, or why didn't I get that scholarship I applied to? Why didn't I get this? Why didn't I get that? It might be due to those other things, but it's a terrible way to go through life, always wondering about it. There are people who will remove the doubt, and they'll be straight up racist right in your face. I'd kind of prefer that, because then I actually know who I'm dealing with. But I go through life simply trying to do the best job that I possibly can and be the best possible person that I can. And honestly, I walk into every room with my head up high. I don't care what kind of setting it is. I'm just as good as any of those people. I'm not better than any of those people, but I'm just as good as any of those people. And I hold my head up high, and I don't worry about
Right.
about those kind of barriers.
Like being confident with yourself.
Yeah. I mean, that's all you can do. That's all you can control at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I think that's a good mindset to have instead of thinking negatively.
Yeah.
What do you love about being a person of color, like personally?
Well, personally, I think that everyone should who you are and what characteristics you outwardly show to the world. I think you should be happy with those, and you should rock those characteristics, and you should be proud of them. And I am. There wasn't always a time when I was a young man, when I was a young kid, and I was going to school with all these other white kids, and I swear, like it wasn't always a time when I was that confident. There was times when I was trying to brush my hair out to be straight. I was trying to give myself a little part on the side like all the other kids had. You come to that time where you just say, you know what? After you've in my case had to do a whole bunch of self-research, because I didn't grow up with parents who were black. I had a brother who was black, but I had to go search out that myself. Because when people put you in that category, you say, well, I better go find out about this stuff. So I did. And I was happy and proud because of everyone in the planet. Let's face it, everybody's group in the planet, no matter what group you belong to and how you want to characterize it, is a benefit to this planet, and have done great things have done great things. And if you find out about those things, you can be proud of any group that you're in. And you can, and I hope if other people don't try to diminish that you for being, in a certain category, then everybody can have those sources of pride without saying to themselves, my group's better than yours. There's no necessity to do that, to have some kind of pride in your own group.
I think that's amazing.
Thank you, Sophie.
So, is there anything else you would like to say to the people that will be watching or listening to this podcast?
I just like to say to, especially to young people who are listening, is do whatever you do in life, just do as best as you possibly can. At the end of the day, the only person's behavior that you can control in your life is yours. That's the only person. And my mom would say to me, that you're getting upset by some other kid calling you a name. Well, all you've done is given power to that person to affect your temperament. And the only person who should be able to affect your temperament, to be able to choose your temperament, is yourself. And I believe that people can choose their own temperament. I believe that you can choose to be happy. You can choose to be confident. It just takes a real belief in yourself. 1,000 people should be able to walk in front of you and say, I don't like the color of your skin. And at the end of those 1,000 people, you should be able to say, you know what? All those people they're idiots. They don't know nothing. That's the way you should be looking at it. I mean, because at the end of the day, that's true. Why would you give power to somebody who actually believes that? Why would you give them any power over your temperament? And I think that's the message that people should have, is that you should be able to choose your own temperament, rock your own characteristics, whatever it is, pick something that you like, and be as best as you possibly can be at that thing.
Thank you for your final words. And also, I really liked how you said your parents' advice about you can only control yourself, and at the end of the day, it's you who chooses what you want to do. So we really appreciate you for coming to our podcast, and we really enjoyed hearing about your experiences as a Black person in Canada, and why it's so important for people to realize that Black people, as well as other racial minorities, are not to be negatively stereotyped against, or so much more.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And thank you for doing this. I couldn't believe how professional the group that you set up, and the protocols you put into place, even just for coming onto your podcast, was amazing to me. It was like you guys are really doing well, and I hope you continue the efforts that you're doing, because it's really important what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. And for those watching or listening, make sure to visit the U&I Instagram page, which can be found at U_and_I_organization, to keep up to date with current events on racism and cultural diversity, as well as opportunities to become a leader and an advocate for racism as well.
Yes, and also please share our podcast with those you know, so that the message to end racism will travel faster and more people will become educated as well. And as always, let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.